Hi, my name is Anna Becker, and I am doing my presentation on legal issues in social work supervision. I was given the topic of ethical and legal issues. I decided to explore the legal issues more in depth so I could provide some more detail for my classmates, and because I am very unfamiliar with the legal system and how it would work with supervision. Ethics for me is a little more self-explanatory. So here, this is my table of contents. Very self-explanatory. All right, so I'm going to start with some legal definitions that I wasn't so clear on. Liability is being responsible for something by law. So I added responsibility is a really good word to use, liability. Then we have paraprofessional. So this is one who has specialized knowledge and technical training, who works closely with and is supervised by a professional. So in this situation, myself, since I am not a licensed social worker, I am a paraprofessional working under a licensed independent. So there were two main types of liability and supervision that I found. First is direct liability. So it may be charged against a supervisor when inappropriate recommendations carried out by a supervisee are to a client's detriment. Direct liability can also be charged when a supervisor assigns duties to a supervisee who is inadequately prepared to perform them. So that would be something like my supervisor telling me to make a mental health assessment and before checking it, give it right to the prescribing doctor, because that's not something that I feel comfortable with yet, and I don't think I'm licensed to do that yet. So it would be her liability to check over everything I do before she were to. I liked this quote that I found. So direct liability would be charged when the actions of a supervisor were themselves the cause of harm to a supervisee or a client. For instance, if a supervisor suggested and documented an intervention that was determined to be the cause of harm. The supervisor does not have to actually carry out the intervention, but if the supervisee follows the suggestion of a supervisor and this results in harm, this is direct liability. So an example of this would be in my situation in my field. I work with young children. So if my supervisor told me that I needed to go see a client and tell them to drop out of school or something like that, even though she isn't the one telling them, I was following her order, and that still makes her liable. It's kind of a weird example, but it just popped up in my head. So this was a little harder for me to understand, vicarious liability. So it involves incorrect acts or omissions committed by the supervisee that can be also attributed to the supervisor. Supervisees can be held to the same standard of care and skill as to that of their supervisors and are expected to abide by the statutes and regulations in their jurisdictions. So basically, we have to follow all the rules that our supervisors follow, even if we are not under the same set of regulations. Some good ways for supervisors to manage risk in these situations would be to maintain really great documentation of supervision, monitor supervisees' professional work activities to really see what they're doing while they're on the clock and getting their hours in the field, and ensures that the services provided to clients by supervisees meet or exceed standards of practice. So each supervisor should treat the supervisee as an extension of themselves. Anything the supervisee does is pretty much their liability. So ensuring that you're getting the exact same services and providing the exact same thing as your supervisor would do is something that a supervisor really needs to work with their supervisee to show them what they believe is. A few other things, our supervisors should identify actions that might pose a danger to the health and or welfare of the supervisee's clients and take prompt and appropriate remedial measures, and identify and address any condition that may impair a supervisee's ability to practice social work with reasonable skill, judgment, and safety. I believe that would be something more like someone who, like an inappropriate relationship with one of your supervisees and one of your clients if you were the supervisor, or someone that had a certain view. For example, if this is off the top of my head, but if you're a supervisor and your supervisee has a very strong no divorce policy in her personal life, and you are working with a divorcing or currently separated couple or something like that, you would have to make sure that your supervisee knows that none of her personal opinions can affect this, because that would impair the ability to practice the proper client service. It is the responsibility of supervisors and supervisees to familiarize themselves with the specific requirements in their jurisdictions for the qualifications for supervision license. Another thing to really manage risk is proper documentation. Both the supervisee and the supervisor are important to avoid any legal problems. Supervisors should take it upon themselves to properly train supervisees in client service documentation. And again, it's back to the liability. If your supervisee is giving the wrong documentation and you're turning that into licensure board or health plan or something like that, that's on you. It's an important role for both roles to effectively document each supervisory session. This is something that I am guilty of not doing. More honestly of my supervisor last year, but I didn't even realize that this was so important, that we both roles need to document their opinion of what went down and how it happened so that you can remember. And so in case anything happens that's a legal situation, you have documentation that you can go back to. So I found this online. I really like this. It has a little to do with ethics as well as law, so I decided to include it. It is the D-angers, so the dangers of supervision. Clearly all of these keywords start with D. So that would be dual relationships, documentation, descriptions or position, so knowing what your duty and position is, duty to warn, dilemmas, disciplinary action, and discretion. So I would suggest everyone Google that, because I read a really great article about it, and it kind of went into all 7 of those, and it's a great way to remember more risk. So I read another article about the most common class suits against social workers by individuals, and this was most recently updated in 2010, I believe. 2007, I'm sorry. So these are from most to least. So the most was incorrect treatment, then sexual misconduct, suicide or attempted suicide, dual relationships, non-sexual, and reporting of abuse to authorities. So those are things that we need to keep in mind as the most frequent of the class C. And I labeled this good news. You can kind of decide if you think it's good news. I liked it. So this is straight from the Code of Ethics. Violation of standards in this code does not automatically imply legal liability or violation of the law. Such determination can only be made in the context of legal and judicial proceedings. Alleged violations of the code would be subject to a peer review process. Such processes are generally separate from legal or administrative procedures and insulated from legal review or proceedings to allow the profession to counsel and discipline its own members. So, for certain situations, you're not getting sent straight to the courtroom. You're getting sent to a panel of your peers or other NASW licensed social workers, where they kind of decide what's the next step. And it might be a legal step. But it's kind of good that, in my opinion, that I feel like I can have a colleague and a peer understand where I'm coming from if I were to get in any legal liability situation. And that way, it wouldn't just be a jury of people that don't really understand the profession or the Code of Ethics. So this is a little relieving to me. I hope to never be in this situation. But it's nice to know that we kind of govern in ourselves before reaching out, which is very social work of us. Using using the resources we have. So I thought A few other legal issues that I found, this one stuck in my head. Supervision may be required following disciplinary action. In such situations, an agreement between the supervisor, supervisee, and another authority figure should be developed to address such items as corrective issues to be covered in supervision, information sharing between the parties, and the frequency of supervision. So I believe this is a situation where maybe you've had some problems in your practice, and not your supervisor, but the boss or the agency decides that you would benefit from supervision, and maybe it is disciplinary action, which I didn't really realize was a thing. So yeah, you can a supervisor instead of a punishment. It's kind of like a class or just a mentor to help you figure out the things that need to be corrected. So this is the exact Ohio supervision law. If you type in these numbers on Google, you will get lots and lots of requirements, but I'll just read this. This rule applies to all social work assistants, so that's us, to all social workers employed in a private practice, partnership, or group practice, so that would be our supervisors, to all social workers engaged in social psychotherapy, and to all social workers seeking license as independent social workers. So all of these rules applies to everybody. It doesn't matter how low up or how high up you are in the social work hierarchy. So I went on the NASW Ohio website to kind of figure out how to become a supervisor and what legal requirements there are. I found a ton of stuff, so I would suggest that you check out that website. Some of the things that stuck out in my mind that I wasn't very clear on before were to be a supervisor, there's a minimum of 9 hours academic preparation before starting a new relationship. Obtain 3 CEUs in the time of your supervisor relationship, be it a school year or whatever you decide. 1 year post-licensure experience. Makes a lot of sense to me. I wouldn't feel comfortable seeing a supervisor 1 year after I graduate, so it's good to know that your supervisors at least need to have, of course, be licensed and also have some more experience than you. That's how it should be, right? And this is kind of obvious, but if you're supervising in Ohio, you need to be licensed in Ohio. You also need to be licensed in Ohio to be working in Ohio, so they pretty much go hand in hand. Got a few more risk reduction tips, great ways to manage liability. Understanding your supervisee's strengths and weaknesses as practitioners. So that's just what we do with our clients, strengths-based perspective. So you wouldn't, if I clearly say I am bad at math, I am bad at graphing, I am bad at numbers, as a supervisor, you wouldn't want to give me the responsibility of a big research statistics project without any type of supervision and checking over my work, because if I was wrong, liability on you. So understanding what your supervisee is good at, obviously, and playing off of that. Developing an adequate feedback system, I feel like that's really important, and it is also something that I felt really comfortable with in my previous placement, and yeah, can't go wrong there. And supervisors knowing their own responsibilities, especially with a newer supervisor who might not actually know about the required hour a week or whatever. That is a way they need to read up. They need to, after they register, they need to know everything, because it is a big responsibility taking on a supervisee, as I have learned. All right, and this is my last thing. I read this in a few different articles, and I think it's very important. This is just kind of something I came up. So don't be afraid to ask about your personal supervision time. Supervisors are required by law to provide 1 hour of consultation to supervisees for every 24 hours in the field. So at UC, as we all know, we do 1 hour per week, or 1 to 2 hours per week. But so once you get out of school, the law says 1 hour for every 24 hours. So if you're working like a 40-hour week, you've got to get 2 hours of supervision in. And your supervisor might not think that is as important, but it is by law their responsibility. So even if you're a little timid, it's important. As we're learning in the supervision class, I had no idea all the stuff that had to do with supervision, everything that went into it, and everything you could benefit from it. So I think that it's very important to have a relationship with your supervisor that you feel like you can say, hey, I need my scheduled time. And if not, as we've discussed before, that's when you talk to the field liaison. So those are just the things I came up with supervision and legality. I didn't really get into the consequences, more just